continuing our series of techniques to elaborate. Today we're going to be working on using details to make comparisons. And you'll recognize that these comparisons are also known as figurative language, like similes, metaphors, and personification. I'm going to show you some examples from published texts. The first one is, moss and ferns, vines and orchids hang from branches like the beards of wise wizards. In this example, we see that using comparisons to unlike objects, in other words, comparing plants to wizards' beards, gets the reader involved in the work because you're asking them to make connections. Asking the reader to make an association between the plants and the wizards' beards helps the reader visualize. If you don't already have a strong idea about what hanging moss looks like, the connection to wizards' beards may give you an image to latch onto. Here's another example. May sat there frowning, a great potato of a woman. From Natalie Babbitt's Tuck Everlasting. It's worth noting that writers deploy this technique of comparing, say, a woman to a potato. They use that technique only for the most important details. The writer, Natalie Babbitt, is emphasizing one particular quality with this comparison. Babbitt wants the reader to know that May is somewhat large and rounded, maybe lumpy in shape, but also it's a good comparison to highlight something about her personality. Babbitt might also be saying that this May character is a bit dull. There are lots and lots of physical and personality traits that the author can describe about any character, but sometimes rather than piling on lots and lots of detail that doesn't add up to something important, it's better to describe one particular point and really highlight it. And usually comparisons let you do that very effectively. Here's a third example from The Watsons Go to Birmingham by Christopher Paul Curtis. It was one of those super duper cold Saturdays. One of those days that when you breathed out, your breath kind of hung frozen in the air, like a hunk of smoke, and you could walk along and look exactly like a train, blowing out big, fat, white puffs of smoke. We'll ignore the fact that it's probably steam, not smoke, and just go with the comparison. Using this technique helps writers vary the structure and rhythm of the writing. Sometimes the reader just needs a break from long lists of adjectives. Here, Christopher Paul Curtis does use a list of adjectives in his comparison. He says big, fat, white puffs of smoke. But he's drawing out how cold it is by using this extended comparison of the fluffy white breaths and the train. So, there's three benefits of elaborating by using comparisons. First, they help the reader participate in the elaboration process by making associations and visualizing. Also, they help a writer emphasize the most important points. Third, they give variety and rhythm to the writing. They avoid repetitive sentence structures. I really enjoy reading a good simile or metaphor in published works, but when I go to do my own writing, I have a really hard time thinking of great comparisons or great figurative language. So here's the process to use. First, you think, what are you describing? Write that down. Then you're going to look at what are the key qualities that you want to highlight about that thing, whether it's a character or an object or an activity. And then you try and think of comparison objects that have that same quality. So, when Cy Montgomery was trying to describe the hanging moss and ferns and vines and orchids, I'm imagining that the qualities he wanted to highlight were that they're wispy and scraggly and long. And I think that because he picked the object of the wizard's beard, and those are the characteristics of the wizard's beard that I think relate to the hanging moss. So I'm doing this a little bit backwards. But I think that it's really important to pick out what qualities you want to highlight and then think, what's wispy and scraggly and long? Oh, I know, a wizard's beard looks like that. So if I'm writing something about lemon lavender cupcakes, and I really want to emphasize the fact that when you bite into them, there's this really rapid change of flavor from like really tart to really sweet. And so what I'm trying to describe is the quick change in flavor in my cupcake. And the quality I want to highlight is how fast it happens. And I think, what are other things that have really fast changes? And I think like, wow, like a sudden thunderstorm, maybe like a toddler who goes from like happy to tantruming in like less than a second, or like maybe a wave that crashes on a beach. But I want to remember that I want to get the tone right. The change that I'm trying to describe is a good change. And I think my first two images, the thunderstorm and the toddler tantrum, those I have negative ideas. The change is not a good one. The wave on the beach, the crash, that's a little more neutral. I might want to try and think of something to compare it to that's a really positive thing, because I'm trying to emphasize the qualities of good quality. Here are some things I could say about my cupcake. I could say that the frosting is like a ring of fluffy white clouds, and I could say that the flavor is like an explosion of summer sunshine in your mouth. You might say, oh, those are kind of ordinary comparisons, and you'd be right, but I'm trying and it's a process. So in your writing, either when you're drafting or revising, use comparisons to elaborate and help your reader participate, emphasize the most important points, and give variety and rhythm to your writing.